the declaration that we want to get strength from the Torah. So we'll do that at the conclusion of today's class, God willing, when we conclude the third book. So we have a lot of work. It's a double portion, Vayakel Pikude, the last two portions of the book of Exodus, as we mentioned. And the theme is very repetitive. It's the construction, Moshe. So there were two portions that describe how God commands Moses to build the tabernacle, the temple, with all the structure itself, plus all the furniture, the ark, the menorah, the table, the two altars, the wash basin, etc. And now, in this parsha, Moses gathers all the Jewish people together, and he tells them about God's commandment. And it's repeated in great detail. Every detail we read about before is repeated again. And then you have, that's in the first parsha, today's parsha. And then Pikude is a description of how they actually counted all the items that were gifted. They made an accounting, and they actually built it. And once again, it's repeated in great detail. So that's part of the discussion that we have to discuss, why all the repetitiveness. But in any case, we will begin, as is our custom, with the parsha in a nutshell. So at least we get a general overview of the story. Okay, let's see what's going on here. Okay, at least we get some color here. Vayakel Pikude in a nutshell. So it's that double portion again, two portions. Moses assembles. The word Vayakel comes from the word kahal, congregation. Moses assembles the people of Israel and reiterates to them the commandments to observe the Shabbat. He then conveys God's instructions regarding the making of the Mishkan, the tabernacle. We'll donate the required materials in advance, bringing gold, silver, and copper, blue, purple, and red dyed wool, goat hair, spun linen, and wool, olive oil, herbs, and precious stones. Moses had to tell them to stop giving. There was so much generosity. The campaign was going so well. Moses had to tell the people to stop giving. So that's first paragraph. Second paragraph: a team of wise-hearted artisans made the Mishkan and its furnishings, as detailed in the previous Torah readings of Truma, Tetzaveh, and Kitisa. 3 layers of roof coverings, 48 gold-plated wall panels, and 100 silver foundation sockets. The parochet, the veil that separates between the sanctuary, these 2 chambers, and the masach screen that fronts it, the ark and its cover with the cherubim, the table and its showbread, the 7-branched menorah with its specially prepared oil, the golden altar and the incense burned on it, the anointing oil, the outer altar of burnt offerings and all its implements, the hangings, posts, and foundations, sockets of the courtyard, and the basin and its pedestal made out of copper mirrors. So that's the end of the first portion. Then we get to the second portion, Pikude, which means an accounting. An accounting is made of the gold, silver, and copper donated by the people for the making of the Mishkan. Bitzalel, Ahaliah, they were the 2 chief architects, and their assistants made the 8 priestly garments, the ephod, breastplate, cloak, crown, turban, tunic, sash, and breeches, according to the specifications communicated to Moses in the Parsha of Tetzaveh, which we already read. And finally, the conclusion: the Mishkan is completed and all its components are brought to Moses, who erects it and anoints it with the holy anointing oil and initiates Aaron and his 4 sons into the priesthood. A cloud appeared over the Mishkan, signifying the divine presence that has come to dwell within it. And that is the conclusion of the second book. So really the second half of the book of Exodus is about making the Mishkan with all its detail. First, the commandment from God to the people, then Moshe conveying the commandment to the people, then the people actually constructing it, and then the accounting of everything that was made. And if you're a little bit bored from the nutshell, you just read the Torah, and it's even more boring because it's very detailed. And it's, again, the big problem is it's all repetitive. And we have many laws in the Torah that are not specified, or they're alluded to with one little extra letter. And here we have verses and verses, two long parshas that could have been avoided with one phrase. The Torah could have said, Moses conveyed the commandments to the people, and the people did exactly as God commanded Moses. And that would save us, well, an hour this class. It would save us an hour on Shabbat, reading these two portions. So that's the elephant in the room that we have to address. Once we address the elephant in the room, we could address the other details. So why all the repetitiveness? So there are a few approaches. I'll give one or two. One approach is that we already see earlier in the Torah, like in the book of Genesis, that when the Torah is very excited about something, it repeats it. What is the example? The example that the sages point out is the portion of Chaye Sarah, which is the story of how Abraham dispatches his servant Eliezer to find a wife for his son Yitzchak. And the whole story where they get to Haran, and he doesn't know where do I start my search? I guess there was no J-date in those days. So he goes to the well and he prays to God and he says, God, I'm going to ask a girl for water. And if the girl gives me water and then gives it to my camels as well, then I know that she's kind. And we have the whole story how he finds her. And then when he goes back home, when she brings him to his house, he repeats the entire story again. And there the sages point out, and the sages say again, why is it that the stories of the servants of the patriarchs, because Eliezer is a servant of the patriarch, why is it that the stories of the servants of the patriarchs are repeated in the Torah, and on the other hand, there are important aspects of the Torah that are only alluded to, the law. And the sages say, well, obviously God, it's more precious to God. The stories are more precious about the servants of the sages, of the servants of the patriarchs. Doesn't really explain exactly why, but you see that if the Torah is, if something is beloved, it's repeated. If you love a story, you keep saying it. I know in my life, my mother keeps telling me the same stories because she's so happy. She loves the stories, so she keeps telling them. So we know all the stories already. So here too, the repetition is because it's beloved. Why is the story so beloved? So you could talk from God's perspective or from the people's perspective. From the people's perspective, this Mishkan, this tabernacle, is actually very reassuring because this is the sign that God wants to dwell amongst them. And what's the big deal? The big deal is because it's after the sin. The construction of the Mishkan, according to all opinions, it's a debate about when they were commanded, but the construction of the Mishkan was certainly after the sin of the golden calf. And what happened at the golden calf? There was a terrible betrayal. And what did the people do? The people went and they gave of their jewelry for the golden calf. And that now of course, they betrayed God. It's very painful. When they realize the mistake, it's very painful. And all of a sudden, God comes to them and he says, okay, now you have an opportunity to make a house for God in your midst. In other words, this is and this will be testimony that God wants to dwell amongst you. So then it's no surprise that the people donate with tremendous enthusiasm. And that's what we said in the nutshell. We could read it in the verses where it says, the people gave too much. I'm going to read it inside, actually. It's fascinating. The people were giving so much because this was an opportunity in their own mind to atone for the giving of the gold for the golden calf, which was something they regretted. So imagine if a person, never happens to anybody on this call, but in other places, someone gets into the fight with their spouse, okay? And now all of a sudden, the other person reconciles. So what do you want to do? Each party wants to give even more than usual because they're so happy for the opportunity to show that the relationship has been restored. And a similar thing is happening with the Mishkan. And because this represents that God is accepting their repentance and God wants to dwell amongst them despite the terrible betrayal, that's why it's so important for the Jewish people and so beloved for the Jewish people. And therefore, the Jewish people keep giving and until they have to be told to stop. And again, that's also the reason for their repetitiveness. So I want to read those verses inside because it's so beautiful. I'm just having, let's see if we can find it here. This is a little bit strange. Why can't I find it? Second reading. Here we go. Okay. Sorry, slow morning today. Here we go. So the people donate, and the Torah describes what they donated, the materials. And then let's read verse 3. So they took from before Moses, who's they? Betzalel and Ahaliab. And Moses called Betzalel and Ahaliab, and every wise-hearted man into whose heart the Lord had given wisdom, everyone whose heart lifted him up to approach the work to do it. Verse 3. So they took from before Moses all the offerings that the children of Israel had brought for the work of the service of the holy, and they brought him more gifts every morning. So over a period of weeks, the people are donating, and they keep coming back every morning with more gifts. So they, meaning the architects, Betzalel and Ahaliab and their helpers, so they took from before Moses all the offerings that the children of Israel had brought for the work of the service of the holy, and they brought him more gifts every morning. Okay, I read that. Verse 4, this is the problem. Verse 4, then all the wise men who were doing the work of the holy came, each one from his work, which they had been doing. Remember, every group is in charge of one piece of the project. Now they come to Moshe and they say, enough already. Verse 5, and they spoke to Moses saying, the people are bringing very much, more than is enough for the labor of the articles which the Lord has commanded to do. So Moses commanded and announced in the camp, saying, let no man or woman do any more work for the offering for the holy. So the people stopped bringing, and the work was sufficient for them, for all the work to do it and to leave over. They had too much. So the Torah spends a few verses to tell you how enthusiastically the people are donating. And the reason for that is, again, because what does this represent? This is not just a building project, like we want to build a campus, I should say, in Greenwich. This is much more than that. This is the idea that the people feel that now God wants to dwell amongst them despite the sin, and that's the this is the testament. This is a symbol of the reconciliation, which is why they're so enthusiastic to give, to correct for the fact that they gave to the golden calf. That's one point. Another point is that, and this is I wasn't there, but I heard the Rebbe explain this on a recording in the mid-70s, and he said something very interesting. He says there is a problem, not a problem. He says some people have a tendency that they get very excited about a vision. You come to them and you say, this is the plan, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to achieve, and they're very enthusiastic. The problem is, the challenge is, could you maintain that enthusiasm throughout the entire project? When you're in the details, when you're dealing with a specific task, could you see and maintain the excitement you had when you first heard about it, right? So this is in every field. The person decides he wants to become a doctor, or she wants to become a doctor. Why? Because you want to help people. So the first day you're all excited and you enroll in school. Yeah, but 6 years later, when you're staying up late at night to memorize some Latin term for a test the next day, it's very hard to maintain that same enthusiasm that you had when you heard about the vision to begin with. It's an important skill. It's a challenge. It's a big challenge. The Kabbalah calls it, could you have the point of inspiration in the palace that you're building? So in the building, when you build a palace, every task is tedious. Every task is detailed. You don't see the big picture. But if you're able, and therefore it's a challenge to maintain that enthusiasm and not get burnt out. So what the Torah is telling you, when the Torah gives the same amount of attention to the vision is the first two times where Moshe hears about this project for the first time. Now the Torah devotes the same amount of detail to explain how they actually did it. What does that tell us? That tells us that they were able to maintain that same excitement that they had when they first heard about it. They were able to maintain that same excitement in the implementation, which means, of course, the lesson to us is it could be done and it should be done. It takes effort. It's a challenge. It's a spiritual challenge, but it could be done. And this is, of course, true for everybody, because everybody in their life has the vision. What do I want to achieve? What do I want to achieve today? Or what do I want to achieve in my life? Or what do I want to achieve in this year or in this era or in this part of my life? And we all have visions. We all have plans. And of course, it's sometimes frustrating that we're not able to carry that vision into practicality. Why not? Why not? Because the vision is exciting. But the specific tasks that it takes to implement those visions, that vision, each task in itself is just a detail. It's boring. It's not exciting. But the Torah is telling you that what happened in those days, the people were able to maintain that enthusiasm in every detail in the actuality. So it's not just in the vision, but in the implementation. And the way the Torah alludes to it is by not cutting corners when it comes to the implementation, by elaborating every detail. Because when you're excited about something, you speak about every detail. So that is the second point of the introduction to this parsha. And now we could start begin to think about the repetition. Now that we discussed the repetition, we could begin to think about the parsha. The good news is we have a wide latitude of topics to cover, because we can cover anything in the last four portions, because the Torah repeats itself, so those themes reoccur. So we could talk about anything about the Mishkan, the temple, and all its many details. So we can go big picture, we can go specifics. The options are endless. The only limitation we have is the limitation of the clock. Other than that, we can do anything we want. So with that introduction, if anybody wants to share, ask a question, something, otherwise we continue and we start digging into the details, because we, like the Torah, are not going to lose our enthusiasm when it comes to thinking about the details. We also want to investigate the details as well.
Rabbi, it's Bob.
Yes.
Good
Hi,
morning.
Good morning.
I don't know if you picked up Rabbi Sachs's little blurb on today's double portion, but I
just saw the title. I didn't have time.
Yeah, he makes a, not only is that repetition, but it's repetition in multiples of 7, calling back to Shabbat again in the beginning of Vayakhel. So, it's multiples of 7, it's 7, it's 35, it's 40. I mean, he went on and on and on and on. So I just wondered if you had any comment about the specific 7 theme.
Yeah, so we can get into detail, and in general, whenever the Torah wants to highlight a theme, it repeats it 7 times. Sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes the words, you look for a word that seems just like not a significant word in the story, but it would say it 7 times. A name would be repeated 7 times in a portion. 7 is a very important number in the Torah. 7 represents the completion of a cycle, what they call shleimut, a complete cycle, like the 7 days of the week. And when the Torah wants to emphasize that we're reaching completion, we're reaching a collective completion of a mission, or a mission or a project or anything, we're reaching completion, that's when we get 7. And 7 is all over the story, especially because we didn't elaborate upon it too much, but at the end of this parsha talks about the 7 days of inauguration, in the sense that the priests were inaugurated for 7 days, from the 23rd of Adar to the 1st of Nisan. And 7 is what brings about the number 8, which we're going to read about in 3 weeks, which is not in 3 weeks, in 3 portions, which is Parshat Shmini, which is the 8th day. And the 8th day is the day that the divine presence dwells in the temple, but we're going to get to that later. So 7 is certainly significant, and the repetitions in 7s is very significant, and it happens all over the Torah. Sometimes you have to look at it more carefully to find it. Sometimes it's more obvious. Okay, but that's one point. Go ahead.
I was just thanking you.
Thank you. Another thing I want to say about number 7 is that the Torah, every time, we can talk about this for the next 35 minutes, which I don't want to do, but we could. So I'll try to do it within 2-3 minutes. Every time the Torah mentions the temple, always, it mentions Shabbat. So it happened the first time when God tells Moses the commandments to build a temple. God reiterates a whole paragraph about the Shabbat, even though we already know about the Shabbat. In this week's parsha, as Bob alluded to, in the beginning of the parsha, Moses calls everybody together. And instead of telling them, in order to tell them about the Mishkan, about the building of the temple, but he doesn't start with that. He starts with Shabbat. I have the screen up here. The first is the opening verse of the parsha. Moses called the whole community of the children of Israel to assemble, and he said to them, these are the things that the Lord commanded to make. Okay? I am positive that the Torah is going to start talking about the obligation to build the tabernacle. But no. What does Moshe say? 6 days work may be done, but on the seventh day you shall have sanctity, a day of complete rest to the Lord. Whoever performs work thereon on this day shall be put to death. You shall not kindle fire in any of your dwelling places on the Shabbat day. And then he says again, and Moses spoke to the entire community of the children of Israel, saying, this is the word that the Lord has commanded to say. Take for yourselves an offering for the Lord. Every generous-hearted person shall bring it, namely the Lord's offerings, gold, silver, copper, etc., etc. And we go on and on about the tabernacle. But if you're gathering everybody to tell you about the tabernacle, about the Mishkan, about the temple, why do you have to start with Shabbat? And like I said, it's consistent. Whenever the Torah mentions temple, it's always going to mention Shabbat. How come? So there are all kinds of interpretations. One interpretation is the practical interpretation, which is what Rashi says. So let's look at Rashi. Okay. Let's look at Rashi. They have the trick on Chabad.org. I can hit click, and then I get to see the Rashi. So the verse says, 6 days work may be done, but on the seventh day you shall have sanctity, a day of complete rest. Says Rashi, 6 days. He, Moses, prefaced the discussion of the details of the work of the Mishkan with the warning to keep the Shabbat, denoting that it, i.e. the work of the Mishkan, does not supersede the Shabbat. In other words, if the Torah says build a Mishkan, so I would think it's so important to build a tabernacle, we're going to build 7 days a week, 24/7. By the way, it wasn't 7. They weren't allowed to build at night, only during the day. So 12 hours, approximately 7 days a week. So we say no. God says, even though God keeps saying, build a Mishkan, it's so important, but on Shabbat you rest. So Shabbat overrides the building of the Mishkan. Why is that? Again, there are so many interpretations. I don't want to go into them right now, but I'll say one. One I will say is as follows. You don't need a Mishkan on Shabbat. What is a Mishkan? A Mishkan is a place that's holy. What is Shabbat? Shabbat is a time that's holy. So in other words, during the temple represents a specific place that's holy. But on Shabbat, there's even a greater level. Wherever you are, this entire period of the 24 hours, the 25 hours is holy. So there's no need to go build a Mishkan on Shabbat because we have that holiness naturally. In other words, by combining these two ideas of Shabbat and the Mishkan, we're telling you that they both have the same theme. One is the Mishkan is the holiness in place, in a specific place, and Shabbat is the holiness in time. And that's why they're always juxtaposed, they're always next to each other, and we learn from one to another, but I don't want to get into that right now. It's too technical, not too technical, but it's not for right now. But the bottom line is it's the same theme. Why is it the same theme? Because one is in place, one is in time. I'm only saying it because Bob says that, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory says that you keep having numbers 7 and 7 and 7 in the story. Why? Because a Mishkan, the place of dwelling for God, and Shabbat is the same theme. It's the holiness either in space or in time. Okay, now that we have introduction, we could start thinking about the specific details. Okay, so what's the big thing? I want to talk, maybe I'll say one thing that's general, and then we'll talk about something that's specific, or a few things that are specific, but let's talk about the general idea here. And the premise, there's a few premises. One premise is that virtually all, starting from the Medrash and going on to all the Jewish thinkers, everybody says the same thing. In other words, everybody says that the temple is not just a physical structure that was built in the desert and then later replicated in Jerusalem, but it also has spiritual significance. And everybody is supposed to make a temple for God in their own heart. And we say this every year. The verse says, when the verse first introduces the commandment to make a temple, the verse says, they shall make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell in them, in the plural. And the sages say, what does in them mean? In them means not in it, not in the sanctuary, but in them, but in the soul of every Jew. Because every Jew is going to make a sanctuary in his own soul, in his own life. And that's what the Medrash says. But you can imagine that Medrash now gives work for the next 2,000 years. All the later commentators have the work cut out for them. Why? Because they now have to look at every detail of the structure and the details and the dimensions of the temple and its furnishings and figure out what's the spiritual equivalent in my own life. And now, if it was hard to get a grasp on the technicalities of how the Mishkan looks, now I have much more work. Now I have to figure out, okay, so every detail, what's the spiritual significance in my life? And thank God the Jews are creative, so they spelled out a lot of this. Of course, I don't think everything is spelled out, so all of us still have what to contribute. If you have any ideas, please share it or write it down. We'll publish it, and we'll ultimately cover all the details of the temple. And over the years, we're trying to cover more and more details. But let's start with one idea. One idea is the body. What is the body of the temple made of? It's made of beams of wood, krashim, beams of wood, cedar wood. And these beams are 10 cubits tall. Okay, every detail has significance again, but I can't do everything, can't attack everything at once. So the body, the structure of the temple is krashim, is beams that are 10 cubits tall. Okay, that's it. That's what we need to know. Now, according to the Kabbalah, the body of the temple, which is the walls, is really going to give us indication. And the name of this idea, the idea that it's made of beams, is really an indication to what the essence of the temple is. By the way, just to make a point, we think of a log cabin. A log cabin, you make a structure out of beams, but in the log cabin, the beams are horizontal. They're not vertical. I don't know why. That's the way it is. Maybe people know why they do. Why it's probably easier to build with the beams being horizontal. But in the temple, the beams are vertical, and therefore you have to have sticks. It's more complicated to make it stand, but it's clear. The temple, the beams have to be vertical. The verse says, "Atzei shitim, cedar wood, omdim," standing erect. Okay. So that's just a detail where every detail is specific, which is why the Kabbalists say that one idea that the beings represent is to represent the human soul. And the human soul has 10 attributes, like the Kabbalah always says, 10 sfirot. So now the 10 sfirot of the human being are alluded to in the 10 sfirot and the 10 cubits of the beam. In other words, if you want to make a home for God, you have to introduce holiness into all of your 10 attributes, which is why the beam must be standing erect, not horizontal, because it represents the human being. If it represents the human being, hopefully the human being is standing erect and not lying in bed, at least not at 10 o'clock in the morning. So you see here that things are different than the conventional way of building because there's a message and there's a theme within every point. Okay, let's zoom out a little bit. What is the purpose of making the temple? What does the temple represent, and how is it expressed in the beams? Okay, so the first thing we want to look at is, excuse me for a moment, you want to go really, we're going to bird's eye view, move away from the details for a minute, then we're going to come back. So the first thing we want to say is that you look at this world, and the Zohar, which is one of the most important works in the Kabbalah, the Zohar says this work refers to this world as the world of falsehood. Alma de Shikra, the world of falsehood. Why? Because everything here in this world is false. Whatever you see, what you see is not what you get. I could smile to you. I could say I love you. That doesn't mean I do love you. Doesn't mean I don't love you. Everything is a facade. It's very hard to get to the truth in this world. And that's on one level. The afterlife, the Zohar calls Alma Dikshot, which is Aramaic for the world of truth. Oh, in the afterlife, everything is clear. Okay. Why else is the world of falsehood? Because the world itself is lying to us. What do I mean the world is lying to us? I mean, when you look around the world and you see the physical world, what story is the physical world telling you? So the physical world does not tell you the story that I have a source, I've been created. Okay, so think about, for example, the concept of light. That in the Kabbalah, the light represents holiness. And we'll get to that at the end of the parsha. Light represents holiness. Why does light represent holiness? Because when you see light, you know for sure that there's a source of light. You don't know what, but the ray of light coming into your room, you're sitting in a dark room, there's a crack in the windowsill, in the window shade. The ray of light comes in, you know the sun is out, right? That's the idea of holiness. Holiness is where the thing you look at, you sense that there's a source. You sense that it comes from God. Now, when you look at the physical world, you don't see that. Yeah, you can understand that everything has to have a source and things don't make themselves and everything has to have a first cause. So you can extrapolate intellectually that there is a God, but everything has a source. But do I feel that I have a source? No, I feel like I have always been here, and I feel like I will always be here. That's my consciousness. And when I look around at all physical matter in this world, I don't see that they were created by God. How do I know? There are billions of people who don't see it that way, don't see that the God would created the world. So according to the Kabbalah, the world is concealing the truth. What is the truth? The truth is that it's creation. It's been created by God. It has a source, and it would cease to exist without its source. That's the truth, but the truth is concealed. That's why we'll look at an interesting experiment here for a moment. If you look at the first, let's see if I can do it on the screen, make it more fun. Make it more fun for a moment. Okay, I'm going to the first verse. I'm looking at the first verse in the Torah. You know the verse, you probably heard it before. Bereshit bara Elohim, in the beginning, God, commonly translated in the beginning, God created. According to Rashi, it's translated in the beginning of God's creation. Okay, let's look at the Hebrew. Bereshit bara Elohim. Now, you may have heard of the concept of a Rashi Tevos, which is an acronym, which is you take the first letter of each word and you combine it and it makes a phrase. And that's one of the ways where the Torah hides meaning. It takes a concept and the message is hidden within the first letter of each word. And that's Rashi Tevot, that's Rashi Tevot, the head, literally the head of the word. And that is something that most of you probably heard of. What is less common and what is even more hidden is when you get a message is coded not by taking the first letter of each word, but taking the last letter of each word. It's even more hidden. So we want to look at the last letter of each of the first three words of the Torah. Bereshit bara Elohim. That gets us to Aleph, Mem, final Mem, Taf. What's Aleph, Mem, Taf? Aleph, Mem, Taf is emet, is true. It's true, truth. In the beginning, God created. In this world, in this created world, there is truth, but it's hidden. You have to find it. It's not obvious. You have to re-scramble the letters and you have to find the letters. You have to find the hidden truth, but it's not obvious. Okay. So keep that in mind for a moment. And then we go to this week's Parsha, and where the Torah says, okay, now we're going to build the temple. And how are we going to build the temple? Well, you need something called a keresh. You need something called a beam. So let's look at the Hebrew word beam for a moment. So let's look at the Hebrew word beam for a moment. And we look at Vayasat HaKrashim, verse 20. And he made the planks for the Mishkan of acacia wood upright, 10 cubits with the length of each plank, of each beam. Okay, let's look at the Hebrew word, keresh. Keresh, keresh. Says the Kabbalah, keresh, beam, ha-keresh is the, but keresh is kufrei shin. Kufrei shin is the letters that make sheker, falsehood. Why falsehood? Because we're taking we're taking something that's falsehood. What's falsehood? Material matter. Why is material matter falsehood? It's telling you a lie. What's the lie it's telling you? It's telling you it's self-sufficient. It doesn't need God. It wasn't created by God. What do we do? And this is really the theme of building of the temple. What we're doing is we're taking something that is on its own, it's falsehood on its own. It's not telling you the truth, which is what? Physical material. And we're realigning it to make it a home for God. In other words, when you realign the physical material, you're taking falsehood, and now the falsehood itself expresses the truth. And that's really the theme of making the temple. What's the temple? A home to God. So when you look at the temple, really what you're doing is you're taking a keresh, you're taking a beam, which a keresh is the letters of sheker. You're taking falsehood and you're making it truth. Now we don't want to go through all the letters, but there's a word me'et. You take from. Me'et is the words emet, aleph mem taf. So this whole story is a story of taking physical matter, which tells you a lie on its own. It has truth, but the truth is hidden. What is the truth? The truth is that it has a purpose. But when you see it, it doesn't tell you it has a purpose. Your job is to rearrange all the material possessions that you have in your life in a way, line it up in a way that the falsehood, meaning the physical that's obscuring its purpose, should now express its purpose. And that is the theme of building of the Mishkan. So we're taking the falsehood and we're finding the truth. Or in other words, we're taking the concealed truth, which is Bereshit in the beginning, Bereshit, the final letter of the three first words of the Torah, which describe creation, represent the truth hidden within creation. And now finally, at the end of the second book, the truth has been exposed. What is the truth that has been exposed? If you align your material possessions the way God wants it to be aligned, now you make a home for God. Now the material possessions themselves tell you about God and bring holiness into your life. And that's the Mishkan, and that's the big picture. Once we get to the big picture, we can get to the details. So that's one of the big ideas. And that's why it's so important that the Torah reiterate the story so many times, because this is not a technicality. It's not a specific mitzvah. This is a metaphor for everything we do. Whatever we do in our life, we're taking physical matter, aligning it with its inner purpose, making a home for God. So in the desert, we did it in one form, but everybody does it in their own form, in their own life every single day. If I take something physical and use it inconsistent with its purpose, it's now I'm taking something which was not truth, and now, in other words, something that concealed the truth, and now it expresses the truth. So that is the first point, and I want to say one more point related to this point. But if anybody has any questions or comments, please share. Otherwise, we continue on our journey here.
Rabbi,
yes.
Corresponding to the hiddenness of God, in a book I just read, I'm reading still, humanity is not gifted with perceiving what is directly, because, for instance, we don't perceive all the everything connected with vibration. We just see a certain spectrum, and also with hearing, dogs hear different things. So we ourselves come in limited in what we see physically.
Yes.
And it's only after great application that we have discovered that there are things that we did not see that we now can take advantage of, because we have applied ourselves and revealed that, but there's much more to be revealed. So it corresponds, it correlates with modern
absolutely.
understanding.
In the ancient world, you had no reason to believe anything you cannot see, right? And that's why even the gods, they all had idols, because everything, seeing is believing. Why would you believe in something you cannot see? Now, in the world we live in the scientific world we live in, the opposite is true. There's almost no reason to assume that what you see is true, right? Just a simple thing. You look at a physical object. What is the physical object? It looks solid. It looks stationary. It looks dead. What is the reality? The reality is that the amount of spinning that's taking place within every atom and the subatomic particles of this object is mind-boggling, and nothing is standing still. Everything is in motion, right? We would never notice that. right? But it takes time to discover the hidden truth. And the same thing is in the spiritual sense. And in our life is the same thing. We have all this material, but the material doesn't tell you its true story. It doesn't tell you what it's here for. It doesn't tell you how it's going to bring you happiness. We're very bad at predicting what brings us happiness, by the way. Don't take it from me. Take it from the greatest psychologists that live today. They tell us we're very bad at predicting what will bring us happiness. But when you align the physical to the spiritual, you make a home for God. It's not about obliterating the physical. To the contrary, you need the physical, but the physical has to be aligned with the purpose. And then all of a sudden, the divine presence is revealed in your life, and the truth of the matter, pun intended, the truth of the matter is revealed. Up till that point, the matter conceals the truth, but then you could discover the truth of the matter. Okay, I wanted to show you one place where it's sown. It's an interesting story. It has Kabbalistic terminology. It has Kabbalistic significance, but it's also just an interesting exchange between God and Moses. And it's in Rashi, I believe. Yes, it's in Rashi, so we'll read it inside. It's actually fun, and it's consistent with the big idea that we're talking about, but it comes at it from another angle, which is what I want to do. After we finish this, we're going to have to turn to the end of the book and celebrate the end of the book. So we have to save a few minutes for that. And in the meantime, let's find this chapter 38. What am I looking at? Chapter 38, verse 8. Chapter 38, verse 8. Okay, let's share what's happening here. So this is a description of how they're building everything, and finally, one of the concluding vessels that we read about is the wash basin, and he made the wash stand of copper and its base of copper from the mirrors of the woman who had set up the legions. Anybody knows what that means? Nobody knows. Who congregated at the entrance of the tent of meeting. So he made the wash stand of copper and its base of copper. But how did he make it? From the mirrors of the woman. Okay, this is a better translation. Literally, ba marot. Marot is the mirrors. Hatzovot. Hatzovot means that they were congregated, which were congregated at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Okay, this is a really bad translation because it gives away too much. The Hebrew word doesn't say woman. Let me try to translate myself. Verse 8. He made the copper wash stand, the et kanonachoshet, and its base of copper, with the mirrors, either you could say that which were gathered, which were gathered at the opening of the tent of meeting. Doesn't say woman, doesn't say anything. So let's read what Rashi says and see what Rashi says about these mirrors. What's interesting about the mirrors is that everything that was necessary to build the temple, God told the people to donate. He listed the list of 13 items, 13 materials that were necessary in order to build the temple. Mirrors are not one of them. All of a sudden, he makes copper was. So it says they made the copper wash stand. That makes sense, okay? But then it says they made it with mirrors. Mirrors, God never asked for mirrors. Why are there mirrors here? So that's the problem. And that forces Rashi to quote the sages, to quote the Medrash, and to give you the backstory. Oy vey, you see how long this Rashi is. The long Rashi. The reason why Rashi has to add information here is because otherwise you have a big question. Why are the mirrors here? God did not tell him to bring any mirrors. So I'm going to read Rashi. We'll see how far we get in the Rashi. From the mirrors of the woman who had set up the legions. Hebrew bamarot hatzavot. Literally, it's the mirrors. Hatzavot could mean that were gathered, but tzvaot could also mean legions. Legions means armies. Of the mirrors of the armies. What does that mean? So Rashi quotes the Medrash and says as follows. The Israelite woman owned mirrors, which they would look into when they adorned themselves. even these mirrors, they did not hold back from bringing as a contribution toward the Mishkan. So they want to give everything. So they brought gold, silver, copper, everything that God wanted, but they also had mirrors. So you donate the mirrors too. So Rashi says, but Moses rejected them because they were made for temptation, i.e. to inspire lustful thoughts. What is the purpose of a mirror? The mirror is total vanity. A mirror is to make yourself beautiful, but it's not spiritual. It's not holy. It can inspire lustful thoughts. It can create temptation. So God says, Moses says, I don't want your mirrors. God never asked for it, and I don't want it. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to him, accept them, for these are more precious to me than anything. What Moses wanted to reject, God says, accept it because it's the most precious. Why? Because through them, the woman set up many legions, i.e., through the children they gave birth to in Egypt. So that's the meaning of with the mirrors of the legions, with the mirrors that helped the Jewish women set up armies, which means many children. Rashi explains, when their husbands were weary from back-breaking labor, they, the women, would go and bring them food and drink to give them to eat. Then they, the women, would take the mirrors, and each one would see herself with her husband in the mirror, and she would seduce him with words, saying, I am more beautiful than you. And in this way, they aroused their husband's desires and would copulate with them, conceiving and giving birth there, as it is said, under the apple tree, I aroused you. Song of Songs. We'll stop here. What are we saying here? A beautiful story. The story is that God never told the people to bring mirrors. The woman decided we're going to bring mirrors because, again, they were so anxious to donate. By the way, the woman did not donate to the golden calf. I don't want to get into that right now, but we alluded to it last week. The woman did not donate to the golden calf. Only the men did. But the women, nevertheless, outdo the men in the donations to the temple. So they want to bring not only the items that God mentioned, but also the items that God did not mention. And they bring the mirror. Moses doesn't want the mirror. Moses says this is vanity, this is lust. There's nothing holy about a mirror. And God says, no, accept the mirrors. And I want to add, not only accept the mirrors, but accept the mirrors for the wash basin. What does wash basin represent? It means not only the mirrors do not cause anything negative, but the mirrors actually purify. They're the substance that creates the purification that the priest would have to wash his hands before he enters the temple to do the holy work. In any case, why does God cherish the mirrors? Because look what the mirrors did. The mirrors were able to, the Jewish women used the mirrors in a way that they would be able to entice their husbands and build up the Jewish people. So what Moshe thinks is so unholy, God says, no, it's really holy. Why? Because that helps the Jewish people populate. Wonderful, wonderful story. It really is nice. I just want to add a few spices from the Kabbalistic perspective. And again, that helps us get a feeling for the overarching idea of what the Mishkan is all about. So the Kabbalah wants to have a definition for holiness. What's a definition for holiness? If you needed a definition for holiness, it's not an easy word, not an easy definition, not an easy thing to find a definition for. What's a definition of holiness? So one definition that the Kabbalah gives is transparency, transparent. In other words, we talked about the truth being concealed, as Jill mentioned. Something holy is something where the soul is recognizable, is transparent. Something unholy is where you don't see its whole, you don't see the good that's within it. Everything has good. Everything has a spark of God. If you see the good, if the item is transparent, I look right through you and I see goodness, then you're holy because you're transparent. If I see you and I say, I don't see any good within this person, then the person is not holy. What does it mean not holy? Not that he doesn't have good. Everybody has good. It means the holiness is obscured. There's a cover because it's not transparent. In other words, if you want to get a little bit poetic, from Moshe's perspective, holiness is a mirror. From Moshe's perspective, the definition of holiness is a window. What is a window? A window is a physical substance, but it allows the light to enter. So what's in Moses' idea? What's a holiness? Holiness is a window. Now a mirror is a problem because a mirror is the opposite of a window. Why? Because a mirror, you put some substance behind the glass, and now the glass is no longer transparent. What do you see? You see yourself. It's complete ego. So Moshe sees the mirror, and Moshe says, there's no way the mirror could be used for the service of God. The mirror is the opposite of transparency. What does God tell Moshe? God says, no. of all the substances I told you to bring, the most powerful one, the one I love the most is the mirror. Why? What does the mirror represent? The mirror represents, you're right, it's not transparent, but what it does, it reflects. What does it mean it reflects? What does reflecting represent? So all physical matter is a mirror in some sense. What do I mean? I mean, when you look at it, it's not transparent. You don't see holiness because it's physical. There's something blocking the holiness. But yet, despite the fact that there's something blocking the holiness, you don't see it, it's obvious, it could produce a reflection of the holiness. In other words, it itself reflects the light. That's the difference in a mirror and something that's not a mirror. If something is completely obscured, the light is not reflected, doesn't bounce off. But if the light could bounce off, now the mirror, the physical object, the obstruction allows the light to bounce off and reflect further to places where it would not be able to reflect without the light. So in other words, all physical matter in some sense is a mirror. If you have physical matter that's not reflecting any light, then it's not a mirror. You can't use it for the temple. But if you take your physical matter and say, I don't see holiness in this object, it's a physical thing, but I can use it for a divine purpose, now it's reflecting the light. It's reflecting the light in a way where the direct light would not be able to reach. So in a sense, the mirror is the symbol of everything we're trying to do with the temple, which is reflecting the light of God through something that is not obvious that it could reflect it. Not through a window, but through a mirror. And that's the purpose of creation, that we align everything we have to be a home for God. And now that even the physical material, which is not transparent, should be able to reflect the light of God. And that is something that's most valuable to God. And hopefully that is what we're doing. And hopefully this is somewhat interesting. You get a little poetry, you get the story with the Jewish women and their husbands in Egypt, but then you get the metaphorical idea of a mirror, which is not transparent. Holiness is transparent. Physicality is not transparent. But if you know what you're doing, it could reflect holiness and expand holiness to places where you would not be able to expect it to begin with. Just like when I have a mirror, I'm able to see things that I would not be able to see without the mirror. I could see behind me. I could find light. I could see unexpected places. So too, through the physical world, bringing God into the physical world is like a mirror in the sense that it helps us see God in the unlikely places. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is the story in short about the big idea and one specific idea about the wash basin. I do want to conclude with the last page of the book and compare it to another story in the book and see what the Torah is trying to do on the last page. So I'm just going to turn to the last page, and as is our custom, we'll read the last verse, and everyone could say together, be strong, and maybe we'll be strengthened. Let me share the last page, and we'll see if we have a minute or two left. We'll see if we can find some meaning of what the Torah is trying to do here with the conclusion here. So the end of the second book of the Torah talks about how Moshe constructs the temple and all its furnishings, etc. And verse 32. So let's read the end of verse 33. And Moses completed the work, and the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the Mishkan. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud rested upon it, and the glory of the Lord filled the Mishkan. When the cloud rose from over the Mishkan, the children of Israel set out in all their journeys. But if the cloud did not rise up, they did not set out until the day that it rose. This is a reference to the book of how the Jewish people traveled through the desert, that when they were supposed to stay in one place, the cloud was above the temple. When the cloud rose up, it was time to travel. And finally, the last verse of the second book, for the cloud of the Lord was upon the Mishkan by day, and there was fire within it at night, before the eyes of the entire house of Israel in all their journeys. And then we say, Chazak, Chazak, Vanit Chazek, be strong, and may we be strengthened. And God's presence dwells in the temple, and that's the symbol is the cloud. And to the extent Moses could not enter, verse 35, Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud rested upon it. It was full of a cloud. It was like this morning, the fog. You couldn't get out. You couldn't see. And that's why, that's why, by the way, next week's portion connects to this verse. Because Moshe can't come in, God has to, the beginning of the third book is Vayikra Moshe, God calls to Moshe. But in any case, the symbol, the image that you have at the end of the third book, at the end of the second book, is the cloud rests upon the temple. Okay, fine. Where else do I see this theme? Where else do I see this theme? So I'll give you a hint. We'll make you look through the whole Bible. We'll find it right away. We'll pull it up. The other place where we see this very similar theme is at Sinai. Verse 15, and Moses went up on the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain, and the glory of the Lord rested on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. And he called to Moses on the seventh day from within the cloud. And the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a consuming fire atop the mountain before the eyes of the children of Israel. And Moses came within the cloud, and he went up to the mountain, and Moses was upon the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. Similar theme. Mount Sinai was covered in a cloud. Moses could not enter. The same thing happens in our parsha. The cloud, Moshe cannot enter the temple until next week's parsha. God calls him to enter. Just like Moshe could not enter Mount Sinai until God calls him and he climbs Mount Sinai. What is happening here? So the first thing you see what is the temple? The temple is a recreation of Sinai. What is Sinai? Sinai is the time when we experience the presence of God in a revealed way. What is the temple? The temple is when we build a temple, we're perpetuating that idea. We're experiencing the idea of Sinai throughout our entire life. Anytime we make a house for God, it's just like Sinai. We're bringing the light of God into the world, just like it came down through Sinai. So that's one point. But now I want to get more specific about the cloud for 60 seconds with your permission. I know I'm 3 minutes late. In general, the cloud is a very strange metaphor for the presence of God, because when you study the Kabbalah, for example, you would see that the metaphor for God for holiness is light. Now, light is the opposite of cloud. Cloud is obstruction. So why is it that both at Sinai and at the temple, the metaphor for God is the cloud? Not for God, for the presence of God is the cloud. So there are many interpretations, of course, but one interpretation is, this is telling us that the essence of God could never be understood. Cloud is obstruction. We cannot see through it. It's not transparent. The essence of God is concealed. We will never understand the essence of God. What we could sometimes see is light of God. That's only a ray. That's only an expression of God. But God himself, the essence of God, is beyond human comprehension, because we're creations and he's the creator. And we cannot enter the cloud. It's beyond our capacity to understand. However, God, in next week's parsha, God calls to us and gives us the Torah. In other words, he gives us means through which we can connect to him. But without those means, it's impossible to know God, because there's a cloud, and a cloud represents concealment, because the essence of God is beyond our capacity to understand. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is a story in short. Mazel tov for concluding the second book. And